Tony Stock was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 1970 in connection with a vicious armed robbery that took place at the Merrion shopping centre in Leeds. Stock always said that he was fitted up by corrupt police officers. Over the next 4 decades, his case went to the Court of Appeal on 4 separate occasions. The hope of his family and those who have followed this long saga is that the case will soon return to the court and that justice will finally be done. In 1979, it was dramatically revealed that a leading member of an East End crime gang, Samuel Benefield, had admitted to the crime in question. He told police at the time that Tony had nothing to do with the Leeds robbery. His revelation should have exposed an outrageous miscarriage of justice.
I couldn't believe it. I was up in the spectators when the judge stayed around and said, we're going to make an example because there's too much of this crime going on. I gave him 10 years. I just couldn't, believe my ears. I just cried out.
If I explained in a few sentences the bare facts of Tony's case to a randomly selected jury, the decision that they would unanimously reach would be that Tony Stock was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted.
On the basis of the evidence now available, there is no evidence to convict Mr. Stock, no reliable evidence at all. I do not think the case as it now stands would be fit to put before a jury.
On the 11th of June 1996, Samuel Benefield walked into the Royal Courts of Justice. He came in through the back door, away from the press cameras on the Strand. He was heavily disguised. He wore a fake beard, sunglasses and a headscarf, looking like, one of the lawyers said, an Arab sheikh. He was also under police protection and he gave his evidence from behind a screen. I want to be here like a hole in the head, he told the court. He went on to describe the events of a robbery that took place in January 1970 in Leeds. His recollection was good, but it wasn't perfect. However, the court rejected that evidence. In particular, Lord Justice Judge claimed that the description of the exit route the gang took that night was so improbable as to undermine the credibility of Benefield. The appeal failed. Tony Stock walked out of court a disappointed man.
So here we are in 1996. Samuel Benefield is giving evidence about a robbery he committed in 1970, 26 years earlier. I repeat, 26 years earlier. Unsurprisingly, he was a bit vague on detail, but his evidence was nevertheless quite clear. He had committed the robbery with 4 men that he named, none of whom was Tony Stock. Unfortunately for Tony, the Court of Appeal decided not to accept Benefield's evidence.
Tony Stock didn't wait for Lord Justice Judge to finish reading his judgment. He got to his feet, he shouted rubbish, and he stormed out of court. He walked onto the Strand and into the nearest pub. He was followed by his wife Anne and James's son. James, who was 16 at the time, later told me that his father was a broken man, but he wasn't broken for long. In the pub, he resolved to confront the chainsaw gang. He decided that he would make them tell the truth. He walked back onto the Strand, he hailed a cab and he asked the driver to take him to Whitechapel Road in the East End of London. This is where Tony Stock came that afternoon from the Royal Courts of Justice. It's the Blind Beggar pub in East London. This is the pub where infamously Ronnie Cray shot and murdered George Cornell in 1966. If you're looking for an East End villain, this really is where you begin. At least that's where you began 20 years ago. So within 2 hours of leaving the Royal Courts of Justice, Tony Stock was in the Blind Beggar pub with Anne and James. He asked the locals if they'd heard of the Chainsaw Gang, Samuel Benefield, Clive Bob Rowe, Charlie Knight and Bernie Carn. Back in the 70s, the Chainsaw Gang were very, very high profile. At the time of their arrest and Samuel Benefield turning Supergrass in 1979, there was a major police investigation looking into some 60 robberies involving £10 million. When Benefield turned Supergrass, the press reported that the Chainsaw Gang were planning a commando-style raid, as the papers put it, on the QE2. Some of the gang were sentenced to over 20 years in prison. Benefield got 5 years and had 42 offences taken into consideration. One of those offences was the robbery in Leeds. So when Tony Stock asked the regulars at the bar if they'd heard of the Chainsaw Gang, a number of them had. In fact, one of them said that one of the gang had a garage around the corner. And so a day that began with bitter disappointment in the Court of Appeal ended in the flat of an East End criminal. That gang member recalled the robbery. However, unsurprisingly, he told Tony that he wasn't about to hand himself into the police. He did say, however, that he might be persuaded to release a statement after he died through his daughter. According to his son James, just that bit was enough to offer Tony Stock a glimmer of hope. James also said it was that point at which the case became a serious obsession for his father.
It changed him completely, yeah. I mean, his whole life then revolved around trying to get justice, trying to prove, picking up anything and everything to highlight it, how wrong he'd been done. I mean, he got 10-year sentence, of which he served 6. It was very, very wrong.
In 1970, Tony Stock is found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison for his part in the brutal robbery of a Tesco store in the Merrion Centre, Leeds. In February 1971, Stock's first appeal is dismissed and an application for leave to appeal to the House of Lords was refused later the same year. In 1974, the case goes to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. It's rejected. Tony leaves prison in 1976, he remarries, has 2 more children and starts a business selling carpets. A police report on the case was filed in 1979 but was buried until after Tony Stock's second failed appeal hearing many years later in 1996. The so-called Brayson report was an internal report by South Yorkshire Police. It was never meant to see the light of day. In 1997, an application is made regarding Tony Stock's case to the newly formed Criminal Cases Review Commission. In 2004, Stock's case is referred by the Criminal Cases Review Commission to the Court of Appeal. It's turned down. In 2008, the Commission decides to refer Tony's case back to the Court of Appeal for what would be the 4th time. Until very recently, this was the only case that the Commission had referred to the Court of Appeal for a second time. The original prosecution case had been completely demolished. I decided to meet up with Glyn Maddox in Bristol to find out how a case which had been so fundamentally undermined could have gone before the Court of Appeal 4 times, only to be dismissed on every occasion. So tell me about the status of this 1979 police report.
The status of that report was that it was undertaken by Superintendent Brayson. It was very detailed. It was very he spent a lot of time interviewing various people, including Benefield. He undertook inquiries. He went back to the original witnesses who gave evidence at the trial, and it was an incredibly important report. He actually looked in detail at lots and lots of the aspects of the case, but it was then buried. The report was then buried, and we didn't get an access to it until after the Court of Appeal hearing in 1996.
When the commission was set up?
When the commission was set up in 1997, we made an application to the commission, not particularly optimistically, but we thought we might as well, why not? Bearing in mind that a year before the Court of Appeal had turned it down, it didn't look very hopeful, but fortunately the CCRC took a very positive view of it, as most people would, because it's such a strong case. It doesn't get much stronger than someone saying, I did it, he didn't. What was in the report was a whole host of information which would have been extremely beneficial to us if we'd had it in advance of the 1996 hearing. It was about the route, it was about witness evidence from people about a car that had been found subsequently. It was all sorts of information that would have been extremely useful. So the Court of Appeal saying that it wasn't going to be useful was wrong. But the problem with the British justice system is once a decision has been made, it's extremely difficult to overturn that decision. And we have struggled, in fact, not only us, but the CCRC have struggled with the fact that the Court of Appeal in 1996 made fundamental errors, which then it becomes almost impossible to overturn.
New evidence was unearthed as a result of the 1979 police report, which further undermined the original prosecution case. It appeared that the one eyewitness capable of making an identification had been shown photographs, and most likely he had been shown a picture of the one suspect, Tony Stock, prior to his identification, thus calling into question the integrity of an investigation already seen to be highly dubious.
In 2004, there's no doubt that the Court of Appeal made a complete mess of the case once again. They didn't properly take on board all of the submissions that the CCRC had made, which I think were powerful, and it was just, an outrageous decision. Difficult to explain, in a sense, as difficult to explain as the 1996 decision. So we got two incredibly difficult decisions of the Court of Appeal, both of which are complete nonsense.
And then in 2008...
Well, credit to the CCRC, they had another bite of the cherry. They decided that the Court of Appeal had got it wrong in 2004, and they did an awful lot more work, worked around it, found new arguments, fresh approach in a way to the identification evidence, and they put a lot more detail into the submission, and were very hopeful that on this occasion justice would be delivered. But as we know, unfortunately, the Court of Appeal again made a complete mess of the case.
Tony always insisted that on the night of the robbery in 1970, he was at home with his family, his wife and their 4 kids, all under the age of 10. The family was celebrating Tony Stock's 30th birthday. Twinny, aged 6 at the time, spoke with me about her memories of that fateful evening.
I can remember it for being my dad's birthday. And we've always kind of made like a thing about birthdays anyway, regardless of who it is in the family. I do remember the way the room was laid out. I know it was dark, so it was obviously after 4 o'clock, because it goes dark around about 4 o'clock, doesn't it, in January. And just coming in, we just had like a birthday tea. I know where the couch was. I can remember the room set up, coming in with the cake. And I also don't think he was very well as well at that point, because sure he was something wrong with his chest. They're the kind of things that are linked together. So, but I do remember him coming in with the birthday cake, singing happy birthday. And I know it was dark, I do know that. But yeah, he was definitely there for his birthday, but obviously I do remember it.
The official version is Tony wasn't there and Tony was doing this robbery. What kind of impact did that have on you?
Like I say, I was only 6, so it's hard to... So then everything you get told is from what you've been told, really, isn't it? But your memories, you've got your memories, haven't you? And then your mind, do you disbelieve yourself, do you think? But I know that was his birthday cake, and I know that was his birthday. I do remember that.
When the CCRC was established, many parliamentarians thought that the problem of miscarriage of justice had been solved in this country. It clearly hasn't, and it isn't. By the time a case gets to the CCRC, it's too late. The human damage has been done. The person concerned has been sent to prison for something he or she didn't do. And they and their families will probably never recover from the experience. I have clients who have proved that they were wrongfully convicted, but their lives are irreparably damaged, and there is nothing else that they can do other than to suffer the continued pain that flows from that original injustice for the rest of their lives.
For Samuel Benefield, after his arrest in 1978, to have actively engaged in a conspiracy designed to clear Tony Stock, a man he did not know and who had been freed from prison 2 years earlier, would have been illogical madness.
Without going into detail, except that Mr. Wilson, the eyewitness who confronted the robbers for a couple of seconds on a January night, apparently still believes the person he saw was Mr. Stock. And I'm quite sure that the way the aspects of the way Mr. Wilson was handled as a witness led him to be sure of what he could not have been sure of, that the person he saw was Mr. Stock.